and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today on the show, we have Andrew Pickens. He's an emergency physician and he wrote a pair of KevinMD articles. The first, The DNA of the United States of America, and second, The Cancel Culture and the Erasure of Less Just Times and Imperfect People. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me to do this, Kevin. I'm happy to be here.
So we'll get into your articles in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
I'm originally from the Midwest. I live in Connecticut right now. I started off, I'm a St. Louisan. I was born there, grew up a decent amount of time in Kansas, and went to college there. I was a philosophy major at the University of Kansas. From there, I went to law school at Washington University in St. Louis, and then also got an MBA while I was there. Practiced for a few years, and then went back to medical school at St. Louis University, and went to residency at UNC for emergency medicine. And now I'm a practicing emergency physician for the last 15 years. I guess it's counting residency 15 years. Ended up in Connecticut at this point.
We're speaking in the beginning of October. How's the pandemic affecting your emergency department?
I think Connecticut's done a very good job of managing it, and I'll say that up front. I mean, since May, maybe even April, we peaked pretty early and we haven't started coming back up again. And so it's been manageable here, but I will say that the effects of COVID are long lasting on the volumes in the emergency department. The structures we built to deal with it are still there, and they're ready to be called upon when we need them. And it's still ever present. It's just not in the volumes that we've had to deal with back in the spring.
All right, so let's get into your KevinMD articles, and they're somewhat related. Your most recent one, The DNA of the United States of America. Now, for those who haven't read that article, can you walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
So, the title of it, The DNA of the United States of America, came from what I saw in politically in the just kind of atmosphere we were seeing at the time, that there was a lot of unrest in the country. And there were several commentators, and most cable news now isn't really news. It's almost all political opinions of one sort or another for the most part. There was what I saw as some real attacks on the foundation of our country. And we can discuss what the foundation of our country is, but what I consider it to be is the Constitution and the rights that were written into that Constitution for everyone. They may not have existed at the time it was formed, but they certainly exist at this point. We can argue about how well they exist at this point and how equally everybody is treated currently. But I think that the constructs that the founding fathers put together have allowed us to get to the point where we are now, which is, I think everybody would have to agree, a lot better than it was in the 1780s and the 1770s when our country really came to be.
So you talk about things like cancel culture and the removal of Confederate statues and how that may progress to the removal of statues from our founding fathers. Can you talk about the arguments, pros and cons for that?
Yeah, so, and I wrote in the first article I published about a trip my wife and I took to Charleston, South Carolina. It was about the same time that we decided to move up to New Haven. And that's a very historic city. There's a lot of parts of it that are really, and I think I used the word steeped in history there. Both good and bad, slave market as well as Fort Sumter, et cetera. And it's an eye-opening experience to go to a city like that has preserved a lot of those landmarks that represent some horrible times in our past as well as some good times in our past. And when I saw some of the political unrest and the public unrest, civil unrest, that had gone from just being peaceful to somewhat violent and destructive at some points, it moved me in a way that I just felt like I had to say something about it. I certainly understand both sides of the argument for it. And I think there's been questions posed to me in the past about when we're talking about Confederate statues, when we're talking about monuments to people that were on the South side of the Civil War, that were put up at times when people that may not like those statues had no say in our country. How is it just to keep those up? And I think the point of my article isn't that it's just to keep them up. The point is, in a democracy, we should do it in a way that a democracy would have it done correctly. And that would mean if a city council decides to vote to take a statue down, that's democracy at work. If a group of people decide to tie it to a truck and pull it down, that's not democracy, that's vandalism. And so it's not about so much the fact that they have to stay there and everybody has to look at them every day, especially if it offends them. It's what do we do with them? I do think that, if you vote to move them, take them down, put them in a museum, put them somewhere else where they can still be seen. There is some historical importance to them that I think that we can learn from. But it's really the idea of we need to follow the laws that are in place to have our voices heard so that we can preserve what we've got in society. And I hope that kind of gives you some context to where I was coming from in that.
Sure. So the historian W. Fitzhugh Brundage, he wrote that specifically with the Confederate monuments. He said that they were, in short, the result of private groups colonizing public space. And furthermore, African Americans who objected to the erection of these monuments had no realistic opportunity to voice their opposition to them. So what's your response to something like that? People who see these monuments as symbols of, say, white supremacy?
I don't know that I disagree with that statement. Depending on when they were built and who decided to put them up, et cetera. I think that there's probably a very valid point being made there. Nonetheless, they were put up, and in order to take them down, now with a different country, you do it in a way that is more acceptable, I think, to the majority of the people in the country, which is vote the people in that you want to have in office that will take the statues down. And that's kind of the way I see it needs to work. And I'd be a hypocrite if I said that wasn't the case, right? I mean, it's what the will of the people want. But another part of the two articles I think is a common theme is that, me voicing that opinion, I don't think it's particularly controversial, right? It's basically saying if a group of people who hold power in an area because they've been voted democratically by people to make decisions about what to do with statues or any other, monuments, decide to take an action, that's democracy at work. So, I mean, to me, what I wrote isn't inconsistent with what you stated from the historian. I think it's completely consistent.
So that leads into the hot topic of what we call cancel culture. And that's the subject of the first article that you wrote. In your view, what exactly is cancel culture?
So it's kind of a catchphrase, right? And I'm not sure there's a really good definition that everybody would agree to when they hear it. But to me, it's when you, at least in one form, is that if you have an opinion and somebody else doesn't like it, they tend to cancel you and everything that you stand for, regardless of who you are. And so that's one definition of it, right? There's other ways where it's appropriate, right? You should be canceled if you're a mass murderer and you've done other things to people. I mean, you should be canceled. I agree. But when it's used to quash free speech, that's when I start having issues with it. Okay, and that's not exactly where the line is. It's probably further back than that. But the idea is the United States, if there's one thing we've gotten right, it's freedom of speech. And there's a lot of other things we've done right, but it's the First Amendment for a reason, right? And that is it's the foundation of what we do. My ability to talk to you on the air and express my opinions now, your ability to be on the air and question me however you feel fit is part of our freedom of speech. And when the cancel culture is starting to be used as a weapon to essentially nullify opposing viewpoints, I think it becomes a problem. And I do think that on the political spectrum, both extremes, left or right, have done that in the past. And I think it's been ramping up recently. In my own personal opinion, look, I'm a moderate, and I'll say that openly, I'm a moderate. And I tend to vote based on different issues, and I try to do free thinking and be logical in the philosophical way I was taught in college to assess things. I think it's been used to polarize the country. And right now, at least what I was seeing during the summer, you could argue was being a little bit more used by the left. But that's not to say the right doesn't do it too, because they do. And so to me, our personal liberty is based on that ability to say, here's what I think, and not expect that my life will be torn asunder because of it. And so if we can't live in a country where you can do that, then it's not the country that this, great United States was founded on and based upon the Constitution that was written over 200 years ago.
Now, cancel culture has risen to prominence over the last 10 years or so. And not coincidentally, that's also the rise of social media. So can you comment on how perhaps social media may contribute to that rise of cancel culture?
It's interesting that you asked that because I was thinking about that the other day. I mean, we live in a society right now where there's nowhere to hide. I mean, media is everywhere. Everything you do is caught on tape if you're not careful. When we're practicing as physicians in the office, we could be getting taped, right? And so it's a very unforgiving way to live in that everything you do, down to the last word that you say that could have been just phrased wrong, or you garbled it when you said it. It's a very unforgiving culture when you've got this much electronic connection, social media connection, but the personal part of it has been removed because I'm not in the same room with you. I'm not able to shake your hand for multiple reasons at this point, right? Not just the rise of social media, but because of COVID. And I do think COVID has added to it because we're more isolated. And so with good friends who are on the other end of the political, although I'm kind of in the middle, but have different views than me, I can have heated discussions with them, not where we get angry, but where we're pretty vehemently into it and talking about it. But I know them, they know me, we're in the same room, they trust me because they know my history. And so, yeah, he has a different viewpoint than me, but I can live with it. And now I'm a guy in a little box here on the computer talking to you. You don't really know me. You don't know what my family's like, what I do in my personal time, etc. And so there's no context to it. And so this individual encounter on a flat screen without the depth of me as a person, I think gives to being, okay, shut that off. I don't want to see it anymore, because it's somewhat dehumanizing, right? It's easy to dehumanize somebody, I think, in the social media culture. And so I think that's why it's become more acceptable. But I also think both sides have seen it as an opportunity to use as a weapon in certain situations, sometimes justified. I mean, we can call cancel culture appropriate when it is essentially saying you've done something so horrific you should not be, allowed to have some of the benefits of our society anymore. But when it's certain things that are arguably reasonable opinions, then I think that when you're taking it to that level and fundamentally affecting somebody's life, it's gone too far.
Now, have you had any personal experience with being proverbially canceled because of your opinions, or did you know someone who had some personal experience of being canceled?
No, I really haven't, knock on wood, and I hope it stays that way. But I haven't. It's me mainly watching what I see on television, being a consumer of social media, seeing what happens. I can't think of any personal to me, or even in what you consider your family or friends circle, where it's really happened. I can't.
Now, putting aside the term cancel culture, some would say that that is a way to speak out against those in power, really. This is a whole issue about power. Now, if we take away the ability to cancel someone, let's say, how can those who aren't in power speak up against the injustices they see by the people in power?
So it's a good point. And I think that comes back to what we mean by cancel in a way, right? So if by cancel you mean speak up and speak against what somebody's saying, that's fine, okay? Taken ad absurdum, you don't like what I say, so you come to my house and burn it down, or something like that. That's a different level of things. Absolute peaceful protest, being able to speak your mind, is the fundamental right we've got in this country, unless you're in a theater and yell fire or something like. There are limitations to it. But I don't think that cancel culture, in the way it's used as a term in society, generally is thought of as only a tool to take down the powerful. It's to take down the people that you don't like their viewpoints so that your viewpoint can get stronger. So I understand your question, but I don't think in that sense we're using cancel culture quite the same. I think there's plenty of outlets now to get your viewpoints out. And I think that might be part of the reason that people have gone to such a large hammer as cancel culture, to try to take somebody out and nullify their opinions, even if they seem to be somewhat reasonable.
This is also an issue of boundaries. Where is the boundary of what's acceptable and what is not between two groups of people? Now, I know that's very difficult with social media, but what are some of your solutions going forward? How can these two groups of people find out and negotiate and really debate the line of what's acceptable and what's not?
Yeah, so look, I think this starts at both a leadership and at a societal level, right? Look, and this is my own viewpoint. It's clear from the articles I wrote. I believe the United States, and I'm not trying to be, nationalistic when I say this, but when you look at the formal laws in the living document that is the Constitution, that allowed our country to develop where it is today and allowed us to have these conversations and have peaceful protests, etc. I believe that this country is one of the few places you can do this and do it appropriately. And so what do I take the solutions? Well, you got to have strong leadership that allows for a diversity of opinion, okay? And when I say diversity of opinion, I mean, here's my view, I'm on the right, here's my view, I'm on the left. It doesn't make you a bad person because you don't agree with me. It just means that we have to have a little bit more decorum in the way we go about talking about stuff. I think it starts at the top, but I think as a society, we have to just not accept when people take it beyond mere discussions and very vibrant discussions about differing viewpoints and start doing ad hominem arguments against people because of it. Or taking because you are supporting one certain argument that everything that some people have that believe that is now part of you, right? And I know I'm talking a little ethereal in general there, but I think the idea is it has to come from the temperature of society. It has to come from each individual saying, I'm not going to put up with some of the crazy violence or crazy name calling or some of the stuff that may or may not have been popularized by some of the popular reality TV shows we see these days and that sort of thing. It's more about leadership, strong leadership, respecting this country and its foundation, and the true belief that at the end of the day, the words that all men are created equal is probably one of the most important sentences that's ever been written in a governmental document. And so that's where, that's where my view on it is. And I think that's the best way to go about it. It's just, we have to take a stand and say, we're not going to accept this kind of overzealous canceling of individuals because they just don't agree with us, especially when they have reasonable opinions. And we can talk about what reasonable is, but I think most people know what that means.
So how realistic is that, you think, going forward? We live in such a polarized society. Everyone is in their own bubbles, and on Facebook, they have their Facebook feeds just purely of people who they agree with. So I think everything you said certainly is a path forward, but realistically, how can we do that?
That's a very good question. And I'm not sure I know the answer. Look, I'm 51 at this point, right? And so I've seen a lot. I'm still, hopefully, knock on wood, got a lot more to see. I think where we go from here is something that most of us can't predict. If 15 years ago you had told me I'd have something in my pocket that was as powerful as the laptop I had at the time and more so, and had more connectivity with everybody else in the world, I would have thought it was odd. I think it was cool, but it's kind of weird, right? And when the first iPhone came out and when I was in residency, I don't think I appreciated the amount of change that would bring to this country, having smartphones in our pockets everywhere. So I don't know how realistic it is, but what I can say is this, and this is my own personal viewpoint, and that is the United States Constitution and every right that is guaranteed by it has withstood huge changes in our society for over 200 years, almost 250 years at this point. It's going to persevere through this, and we'll come out on the other end better than we were, like we have every time something like this has happened in our country. And I think we're heading in the right direction. It's just an issue of how fast we're going to get there and how we get there.
We're talking to Andrew Pickens. He's an emergency physician, and he wrote the KevinMD articles, The DNA of the United States of America, and The Cancel Culture and the Erasure of Less Just Times and Imperfect People. Andrew, do you have a take-home message that you want to share with the KevinMD audience?
All I would say is this. Every line I put in my articles, I chose very carefully. And I did that because this is such a delicate topic. I wish it wasn't so delicate, because then I think it would be the world that I would envision us living in, which is where we can have the open flow of ideas between people, even if they're on the polar opposite ends of the scale. That's about it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. I appreciate it.